The janitor had been working at the school for decades, quietly moving through the hallways, classrooms, and auditorium without drawing much attention to herself. She was a small woman, with slightly hunched shoulders and hands that had seen years of hard work. She wore the same kind of simple uniform every day, the kind that made her blend into the background. Most of the students barely noticed her, except when she accidentally bumped into them while cleaning or when she was pushing the heavy mop across the shiny floors. She always greeted the few students who looked her way with a soft smile, but her eyes held a depth that no one seemed to understand. There was a calmness in her movements and a quiet pride in her work. She didn't complain about the long hours or the heavy lifting, and she never seemed angry, even when some students whispered jokes or made fun of the staff. She had learned to ignore the laughter and the teasing long ago. The school was always full of noise and energy. Students ran from classroom to classroom, shouted across the hallways, and giggled in corners. Teachers walked briskly with papers clutched in their hands, trying to manage lessons and keep everything in order. Among this chaos, the janitor moved steadily, methodically, almost like a shadow. She cleaned classrooms, dusted shelves, and mopped floors, leaving behind a sense of order in the midst of all the commotion. Even though she was often invisible to most students, some of the younger children had begun to notice her kindness. They would watch her carefully place each book on a shelf or gently wipe a chalkboard. There was something in the way she moved that suggested she had done this work not out of obligation but with care and respect for the school. Some students whispered among themselves, wondering why a woman of her age still worked so hard. But no one really asked. Everyone assumed she had always been the janitor and that she had always been like this. What most people didn't know, however, was that she had a story far beyond the halls of the school. Before she became a janitor, she had lived a life full of music. She had trained her fingers on piano keys for countless hours, performing at small gatherings and local events. She had even played at a few larger concerts in her youth. But life had changed. Responsibilities, circumstances, and the need to earn a living had shifted her path. Music became something private, hidden away, a secret treasure she carried in her heart. On a typical afternoon, she wheeled her cart into the music room. The door was slightly ajar, and she noticed a few students peeking in as she entered. They were curious about the room, a place where instruments were kept, and where the piano sat at the center, polished and gleaming. The students had always assumed that a janitor's duties were limited to cleaning and sweeping, never imagining that she could be connected to the instruments in any meaningful way. She began dusting the shelves and arranging the music sheets neatly. Her hands moved carefully over the piano keys as she wiped the surface, her fingers tracing the contours almost reverently. One of the students whispered to another, laughing quietly, "Can you imagine her actually playing that thing? She's a janitor, not a musician." The other students giggled, nodding in agreement. Despite their laughter, she did not react. She simply continued her work, knowing that the music room would soon be quiet, and she would be alone with the instrument she loved. There was a patience in her, a calm confidence that whatever was hidden would reveal itself in the right moment. She had learned long ago that people often underestimate what they cannot see, and she was content to let the world remain unaware of her talent. Throughout the day, the students passed by, some laughing, some curious, and some completely indifferent. They didn't pay her much attention, except when they accidentally bumped into her or noticed the cart of cleaning supplies in the hallway. Teachers occasionally offered a nod or a brief greeting, but most were too busy with their own responsibilities to think much about the janitor beyond her role in maintaining the school. She had seen generations of students come and go. She remembered the bright-eyed children who had once filled the hallways with laughter and the teenagers who now filled them with energy and chaos. She had been there through it all, quietly observing, helping, and maintaining a steady presence that went mostly unnoticed. But she had also learned to read the moods of the students, to sense when someone was troubled, and to offer a kind word or a small gesture of encouragement. Many had forgotten, but some remembered her warmth long after they had left the school. Evening approached, and the school slowly emptied. The noise faded, and the corridors grew quiet. She lingered in the music room a little longer, arranging the music sheets one last time. The sunlight slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. She glanced at the piano and allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Soon, the room would be empty, and she would have a few moments alone to indulge in the secret joy that had sustained her through the years. The janitor's life at the school was simple, yet full of hidden depth. She carried the weight of years, the history of her own experiences, and a talent that had never been fully recognized in this environment. The students who laughed and joked had no idea of the world she had lived in before these hallways, or of the beauty that lay within her. They only saw the uniform, the mop, and the cleaning cart. But beneath all that, there was a story waiting to be told, a melody waiting to be played, and a life that had much more to offer than anyone could imagine. As she finished her work and wheeled the cart out of the music room, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The students might laugh, the teachers might overlook her, and the world might underestimate her, but she knew who she was and what she could do. She had lived a life of music, a life of dedication, and a life of resilience. And soon, perhaps, the students would see more than just the janitor. They would witness the talent that had been hidden in plain sight all along. That afternoon, the school hallways were bustling with students hurrying to their next class, some chatting loudly, some laughing at jokes they shared with friends. In the midst of all the noise, the janitor pushed her cart down the corridor, humming softly to herself. Her attention was on the floor and the corners of the classrooms she passed, making sure everything was clean and orderly. She barely noticed the curious glances of the students. They were used to her presence by now, mostly ignoring her, except for the occasional whispered joke or sneaky glance. As she turned into the music room, a few students were already gathered outside the door, peeking inside. The large upright piano stood proudly in the center of the room, shining under the afternoon light that streamed through the windows. The janitor moved in quietly, arranging her cleaning supplies near the back of the room. The students were whispering among themselves, pointing, and trying to stifle their laughter. They had never seen her in this room before, and some of them wondered why she would spend time there. One student nudged another and said in a hushed voice, "Can you believe she even knows how to touch that piano? She's just a janitor." The others giggled, sharing the same disbelief. None of them had ever imagined that someone who quietly cleaned the hallways and emptied trash cans could have anything to do with music, let alone a piano. They leaned closer to the door, some pressing their ears slightly to try to hear her movements. The janitor noticed them, but she did not stop her work. Her hands moved gracefully as she dusted the piano, her fingers running along the smooth surface with care. She didn't react to the whispers or the snickers. It was clear she had experienced moments like this before. She had long learned that people often underestimated her based on appearances, and she had grown used to letting them think what they wanted. One of the students, emboldened by the group, stepped forward slightly and whispered, "Do you think she even knows how to play?" The others laughed quietly, exchanging glances filled with skepticism and amusement. They couldn't imagine a janitor at their school sitting down and performing something beautiful on the piano. To them, the idea was absurd and almost comical. The janitor continued her work, arranging the music sheets neatly on the stand. She paused for a moment and looked at the piano keys, her fingers brushing them lightly, as if remembering something long forgotten. There was a quiet longing in her eyes, a memory that perhaps no one in that room could understand. The students leaned in closer, whispering among themselves, still laughing softly at the thought of her playing. Then, almost as if compelled by a memory, she sat down at the piano bench. The students gasped in surprise. One of them whispered, "Wait, she's actually going to play?" The others watched, half in disbelief and half in excitement. The janitor closed her eyes for a brief moment, took a deep breath, and positioned her fingers over the keys. There was a sense of calm that filled the room, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The first notes were soft and delicate, almost like a gentle whisper. The students' laughter stopped instantly. Their eyes widened, and they exchanged puzzled glances. None of them had expected this. The janitor's hands moved over the keys with ease and precision, each note carrying a depth and emotion that was impossible to ignore. The sound was pure, flowing, and enchanting. It was as if the piano had been waiting for her touch, and she was finally bringing its voice to life. At first, the students were stunned, unable to speak or even breathe normally. The music seemed to fill the room completely, creating an invisible wall between them and the outside world. Even the sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to soften, as if pausing to listen. The janitor played with grace, her fingers dancing over the keys, her eyes sometimes closing, sometimes glancing at the sheet music she had organized with care. Each note told a story that the students could feel but could not yet fully understand. As the music continued, the students began to realize that the woman they had laughed at, the one they had considered ordinary and unremarkable, possessed a talent that was extraordinary. The disbelief in their eyes slowly turned into awe. Some students leaned closer, captivated by the performance. They forgot to laugh, forgot to whisper, and simply listened. The sound of the piano was not just music. It was an expression of years of practice, dedication, and a lifetime of passion that had never faded. One student whispered to another, barely audible, I didn't know she could play like that." The other nodded, his eyes fixed on the janitor as she played. The laughter that had once filled the hallway was gone, replaced by a profound silence, a reverent attention that no one had expected to feel for someone they had underestimated. The janitor, focused entirely on the music, did not notice the change in the room. She played not for recognition, not for applause, but because it was a part of who she was. The students slowly began to understand that talent can be hidden in the most unexpected places. The janitor's performance was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving. She was not just a janitor. She was a person with a rich history, a person who had loved music deeply and carried that love with her even in the quiet, unnoticed corners of her life. The students felt a mixture of awe and shame, realizing that their earlier laughter had been premature and unfair. By the time she finished playing, the room was filled with a gentle silence, almost sacred in its stillness. The last note lingered in the air, and the students remained seated, unsure whether to speak or move. The janitor looked up, her eyes meeting theirs, and gave a small, kind smile. There was no anger, no judgment, just a quiet acknowledgement of their presence. She had shown them a piece of herself, a piece of her life that had been hidden away, and she had done so without any expectation. One of the students finally spoke, his voice low and sincere. That was amazing. We didn't know." His words trailed off, unable to capture the depth of what he had just witnessed. Others nodded, their expressions filled with respect and newfound admiration. The janitor simply nodded back, returning to her cleaning supplies, her demeanor calm and composed. She had shared her gift, and that was enough. From that day on, the students looked at her differently. The laughter that had once been aimed at her vanished, replaced by curiosity, respect, and a desire to learn more. They began to see her not just as a janitor but as someone extraordinary, someone who had lived a life full of experiences and talents that they had never imagined. She continued her work quietly, cleaning and maintaining the school, but now with an added layer of recognition, a silent acknowledgement that they had witnessed something rare and special. The janitor's secret was no longer entirely hidden. She had allowed the students a glimpse into her world, a world of music and passion that had sustained her for decades. And though she would continue to work quietly, moving through the hallways and classrooms, the students would always remember the afternoon when they discovered the extraordinary talent of the 68-year-old janitor who had quietly transformed their perception with a simple melody on the piano. The next day, word of the janitor's piano playing had spread quietly among a few students. Some couldn't believe it, thinking it might have been a one-time event or an exaggeration. But a handful of curious students decided to watch the music room after classes, hoping to catch a glimpse of what they had seen before. They waited in the hallway, some leaning against the walls, their eyes fixed on the door. When the janitor arrived, she moved with her usual calmness, pushing her cart quietly into the music room. She greeted the few students who peeked in with a small smile, a gesture so soft and unassuming that it barely drew attention. Her hands were already moving toward the piano, brushing the dust off the keys with care. The students watched, their curiosity growing, unsure of what would happen next. She settled onto the piano bench, her posture straight but relaxed. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. This time, however, she was not just touching the piano lightly. She was ready to play fully, to let the music flow as it had for decades before life had redirected her path. The students, though still skeptical, felt a sense of anticipation. They knew something special was about to happen, even if they did not fully understand it. The first notes filled the room softly, gradually building into a melody that was both delicate and powerful. The students' eyes widened as they listened, the sound so rich and full of emotion that it seemed to pull them out of the busy, noisy world they had left behind. It was as if the janitor was telling a story with her music, a story that they could feel but could not yet see in their minds. The melody had a depth that was surprising and beautiful, almost impossible to believe had come from someone they had laughed at just the day before. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, each note precise yet flowing naturally, creating harmonies that filled the room with warmth and light. The students watched in silence. Their earlier amusement completely vanished. They could sense the years of practice, the dedication, and the hidden life that had prepared her for this very moment. Every movement of her hands, every pause and subtle emphasis, spoke of someone who had lived and breathed music for decades. The students could not look away. Some leaned forward, resting their elbows on the doorway as they listened, mesmerized. Others stood frozen, unsure of how to react, their minds racing with disbelief. The janitor's eyes occasionally flicked toward the students, acknowledging their presence with a gentle nod, but she did not let it distract her from the music. She played with the intensity and passion of someone who had spent a lifetime waiting for the right moment to share what she loved. As the performance continued, the room seemed to transform. The walls, once filled with posters and instruments, now held an almost sacred silence. The piano's notes echoed softly, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner with a sense of wonder. The students felt their own emotions shift as they listened. Some felt a strange connection to the janitor, sensing her life story through the music. Others felt awe at the skill and beauty they had underestimated. And a few even felt a pang of guilt for the laughter and teasing that had come so easily before. The melody grew more complex, weaving layers of emotion into every note. The janitor's fingers flew over the keys, dancing effortlessly, creating a rhythm that was at once gentle and commanding. The students could see the concentration on her face, the way she allowed herself to be fully present in the music. Each chord carried a story, each pause a reflection of years lived and experiences felt. The room seemed to hold its breath, the outside world momentarily suspended as the music took over. One student whispered softly to another, almost afraid to break the spell, "She's amazing. I never imagined this." The other nodded, equally captivated, their previous assumptions falling away with every note. They had come expecting a curiosity, maybe a small performance, but what they were witnessing was the culmination of decades of dedication and passion. The janitor's talent was undeniable, a gift that had remained hidden for far too long. As the piece reached its climax, the music became more intense, more expressive. The janitor's hands moved with precision and emotion, guiding the melody to a place that felt both powerful and tender. The students were completely silent now, their attention fixed entirely on the piano. They felt the energy of the music, the story it carried, and the person who had created it. The room seemed to vibrate with the emotion of the performance, a shared experience that connected the janitor and the students in a way that words could not. When the final note lingered and faded into silence, the room remained still. The students blinked, trying to process what they had just heard. The janitor sat quietly, her hands resting lightly on the keys, a soft smile on her face. She had given them a gift, one that went beyond mere entertainment. She had shown them a part of herself, a part of her life that had been hidden and undervalued for too long. One student finally stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. That was incredible. We didn't realize," he trailed off, unable to fully express the depth of his admiration. The others nodded, their expressions a mix of awe, respect, and newfound understanding. The janitor's performance had changed their perception completely. They no longer saw her simply as a janitor, but as a person with talent, history, and passion. The janitor returned to her cleaning tasks afterward, moving quietly around the room. The students lingered, watching her, still amazed at what they had just witnessed. Some were too shy to speak, while others struggled to find the right words. The experience had left an impression on all of them, a memory they would carry for a long time. They realized that they had judged someone too quickly, based on appearances alone, and the lesson was clear and humbling. From that day forward, the music room held a new significance. The students who had witnessed the performance often returned, quietly listening and observing, sometimes even asking to learn from her. The janitor continued her work, cleaning and maintaining the school, but now with the subtle knowledge that she had touched lives in a profound way. Her talent, once hidden and underestimated, had finally been recognized, if only by a few, and that recognition was enough. The performance also had an impact beyond the music room. Other students heard whispers about what had happened and began to see her differently. The laughter that had once been aimed at her was replaced by respect and curiosity. She continued her work as always, but now the school was a little kinder, a little more aware, and a little more appreciative of the people who lived quiet, remarkable lives behind the scenes. The janitor's story was no longer entirely hidden. She had shared a part of herself, revealing a depth of talent and humanity that few had expected. And while she would continue to work quietly, moving through the hallways and classrooms, the students who had witnessed her playing would always remember the afternoon when she transformed their perception with music, leaving them with a sense of wonder, respect, and a lesson they would carry with them for years to come. After her stunning performance, the students could not stop thinking about the janitor. For days, they whispered about it in hallways, in classrooms, and even in the cafeteria. They replayed the melody in their minds, trying to understand how someone they had laughed at could hold such a talent. Curiosity turned into a quiet desire to know more about her life, the life that had led her to this school and to this piano. One afternoon, a few brave students gathered near her while she cleaned the music room. They hesitated at first, unsure of how to approach someone they had previously underestimated. Finally, one spoke softly, Can we ask you about your music?" The janitor looked up, her eyes calm and warm. She nodded gently, inviting them to stay and listen. It was rare for her to talk about her past, but she sensed that these students were genuinely curious and sincere. She began slowly, telling them about her childhood. She had grown up in a small town where music was her refuge. Her parents had little money, but they supported her passion, encouraging her to practice and learn as much as she could. She remembered hours spent with her fingers on the keys, the music filling her small home with light and joy. Her talent was noticed by local teachers, and she was invited to perform at small events. Those performances, though modest, gave her a sense of purpose and belonging. As she continued, she spoke about her youth and the larger performances she had been a part of. She had played at community concerts and small gatherings, even earning praise from people who recognized her skill. Music had been her dream, her escape, and her companion. But life had a way of changing plans. Responsibilities grew, family needs arose, and financial struggles made her put aside the dreams of performing. She had moved to the city, taken the job at the school, and music became something private, a secret that lived in her heart. The students listened intently, their earlier skepticism replaced by admiration and empathy. They realized that the janitor's life had not been simple, that her path had been shaped by challenges, sacrifices, and perseverance. They could see now that her talent was not just a skill, but a reflection of a life lived fully, even if quietly. One of the students whispered, "We laughed at you. We were wrong." The janitor smiled softly, not with anger, but with understanding. She knew that people often judged what they did not understand, and she had learned to let those judgments pass without bitterness. She told them about the years she had continued to practice privately, finding small moments between work and life responsibilities to touch the piano, to feel the music, and to remind herself of who she was. Music had never left her, and despite the laughter or the lack of recognition, it had remained her companion, her joy, and her strength. She spoke of the solace it had given her, the way it had helped her through difficult times, and the quiet pride she felt in mastering something so beautiful. The students were moved. They could feel the depth of her experiences, the weight of years of dedication, and the quiet resilience that had brought her to the moment when they had heard her play. Their previous laughter seemed insignificant in comparison to the life story unfolding before them. They realized that talent was more than just performance. It was the culmination of dedication, patience, and love for what one does, regardless of whether anyone notices. One student asked, "Why did you never tell anyone?" The janitor's eyes twinkled softly. "Because I did not need to," she said. "Music is mine whether people see it or not. I play because it is part of me. The world may or may not notice, and that is okay. But when the time is right, and someone is ready to listen, it can be shared." Her words carried a quiet wisdom that the students could feel in their hearts. The students reflected on their own behavior. They remembered the laughter, the whispers, and the casual teasing that had seemed harmless at the time. Now, in the presence of the janitor's story and her undeniable talent, they felt a sense of regret and humility. They realized how easy it was to judge others based on appearances, and how unfair it was to dismiss someone's potential without truly knowing them. They learned that every person has a story, often hidden, that shapes who they are and what they can achieve. One of the students, holding back tears, said softly, "We didn't see it before. We judged too quickly. I'm sorry." The janitor nodded, acknowledging the apology with grace. There was no need for anger or resentment. She understood that their understanding had grown now, and that was enough. She continued to share small stories from her past, each one revealing more of her life, her dedication, and the quiet courage that had defined her journey. As the conversation continued, the students began to ask questions not out of judgment, but out of genuine interest. They wanted to know about her favorite pieces, the moments that had meant the most to her, and the lessons she had learned through music and life. The janitor spoke with honesty and warmth, sharing memories of performances, small victories, and times when music had been her comfort. The students listened with rapt attention, each story deepening their respect and appreciation for her. By the end of the afternoon, the students had learned more than they had expected. They had gained insight into a life rich with experience, talent, and quiet resilience. They realized that the janitor's music was not just about skill on the piano, but about the journey she had taken, the challenges she had faced, and the love she had for something that transcended recognition. They understood that laughter and judgment could be replaced by curiosity, respect, and empathy. The janitor returned to her work, moving quietly around the music room, her presence calm and steady. The students remained for a while, not wanting to leave, still absorbing the lessons she had shared. They knew that what they had witnessed and learned was rare and precious. It was a moment that would stay with them, shaping the way they saw not only her but also others who might be underestimated or overlooked in their lives. After the students left, the janitor sat by the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She thought about the afternoon and the way the students had listened, the way they had begun to understand the value of talent, dedication, and a life lived fully, even quietly. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had shared a part of herself that was meaningful, that had touched the hearts of those who had once laughed without understanding. In the days that followed, the students' behavior toward her changed. They greeted her with more respect, asked questions about her music, and even returned to the music room to listen quietly as she played during her breaks. The laughter that had once been aimed at her disappeared, replaced by admiration and curiosity. The janitor continued her work as always, but now she carried with her the subtle knowledge that her life and her talent had inspired a new awareness in those who had once underestimated her. The lesson the students learned extended beyond the music room. They began to notice the other people around them with more care, to consider the hidden talents and stories that others might carry. They understood that every person has value, depth, and potential, even if it is not immediately visible. The janitor's story had become a quiet catalyst for change, encouraging respect, empathy, and humility in those who had once laughed too quickly. The janitor continued to move through the school, cleaning, organizing, and maintaining the rooms, but now with a new layer of quiet pride. She had shown the students that age, appearance, and occupation do not define a person's worth or talent. She had shared her life and her music, leaving an indelible mark on the students' hearts and minds. And though she would remain humble and continue her work without seeking recognition, the impact of her story would continue to resonate in the school long after the notes of her music had faded from the room. In the weeks following the revelation of the janitor's talent, the school seemed subtly changed. The students who had once laughed at her now carried a new sense of respect, not just for her, but for others who might have hidden stories and skills. Word spread quietly throughout the school, and more students began to see her differently. The laughter and teasing that had once been common vanished, replaced by curiosity and appreciation. The janitor continued her work as always, moving through classrooms, hallways, and the music room with quiet diligence. She cleaned, organized, and tended to the school without seeking attention or praise. But now, students approached her with questions, asking about music, about piano pieces, and even about the small moments she remembered from her performances. They listened intently as she spoke, eager to learn from her experience, and to understand the life that had shaped such talent. During breaks, some students would gather in the music room, not to watch her perform, but to simply listen and learn. She encouraged them gently, guiding their fingers on the keys and explaining simple techniques, never forcing them, but letting their curiosity grow naturally. She found joy in their learning, in their discovery of something new, and in their quiet appreciation for the music she shared. Her influence extended beyond her skill on the piano. It was the wisdom, patience, and kindness she carried that left the deepest impression. Teachers and staff began to notice the change as well. They saw the students' increased respect and awareness, and they realized that the janitor's story had affected more than just a few of the children. In staff meetings, teachers quietly acknowledged the value of recognizing hidden talents, of seeing beyond appearances, and of encouraging students to appreciate the experiences and skills of those around them. The janitor's presence, once invisible, had quietly reshaped the school's atmosphere. Occasionally, the janitor would perform during special moments, not for applause, but simply to fill the room with music. During these times, the students would stop, their conversations pausing, their attention fully drawn to the melody. The music seemed to carry the weight of her experiences, the depth of her emotions, and the richness of a life that had not been easy but had been lived fully. Each note reminded them that talent could be hidden, that wisdom could come from unexpected places, and that respect was earned not through appearances but through understanding. One afternoon, a student asked her why she continued to work at the school instead of pursuing performances again. She smiled gently and said, "Life brings us to different places. I work here because this is where I am needed, and because I can still share music in my own way. My joy comes from playing and from seeing others discover the beauty of it. Recognition is not everything. Music is my gift, and sharing it, even quietly, is enough." The students listened, absorbing the lesson that talent and passion could exist without fame or acknowledgement, and that the impact of sharing one's gift could be profound even in small ways. Over time, the students began to embrace music themselves, inspired by her example. Some signed up for piano lessons, others started participating in music classes with renewed interest, and some simply found a moment to pause and appreciate the melodies that filled the school. The janitor's influence had sparked curiosity, creativity, and respect, leaving a lasting mark on the school culture. Parents who visited the school also noticed the change. They saw their children speak differently about respect, talent, and humility. They heard stories of a 68-year-old janitor who could play the piano beautifully and had shared her passion with the students. These stories spread outside the school walls, serving as a reminder to everyone that remarkable talents could exist in quiet, unexpected places, and that every person had a story worth understanding. The janitor herself felt a quiet fulfillment. She continued her work without fanfare, but there was a sense of accomplishment that went beyond cleaning or organizing. She had touched lives, inspired young minds, and reminded everyone that talent, patience, and kindness could have a lasting impact. She had lived a life of music, and in sharing it, she had also shared a lesson in humility, empathy, and respect. Occasionally, the janitor would catch a student quietly practicing in the music room. She would smile, approach slowly, and offer gentle guidance. She never demanded attention or praise. Her joy came from the small progress, the curiosity, and the understanding that was slowly growing in the students. They, in turn, treated her with admiration, offering greetings, words of encouragement, and sometimes even helping her with small tasks, a subtle acknowledgement of the respect she had earned. As months passed, the janitor became a cherished part of the school community, not just as a janitor, but as a teacher in her own way, a mentor, and a source of inspiration. The students carried her lessons with them, remembering not only her talent, but also the humility, patience, and quiet strength that defined her. They understood that age was no barrier, that appearances could be misleading, and that everyone deserved respect and appreciation. The music room became a symbol of discovery and growth. It was a place where students could see the importance of talent, experience, and the joy of learning. The janitor's piano became a bridge between generations, connecting the past with the present, and teaching lessons that went far beyond music itself. She had quietly transformed the school, leaving a legacy that would continue long after her daily rounds were done. In the final moments of each day, after the students had left and the hallways were quiet, the janitor would sit at the piano, playing softly to herself. She did not need an audience to feel fulfillment. The music was enough. But she knew that the echoes of her playing had already reached far beyond the empty room, touching hearts, shaping minds, and creating a culture of respect, empathy, and understanding. She had shown the students that greatness could be found in unexpected places, and that even quiet lives could have an extraordinary impact. And so, the 68-year-old janitor continued her work and her music, blending the ordinary with the extraordinary. She moved through the school with gentle purpose, cleaning, guiding, and sharing her gift in ways that could not always be measured but could always be felt. The students, teachers, and staff carried her lessons with them, remembering the day they had discovered not just a janitor, but a remarkable person whose life and talent had quietly changed their world. Her story remained a lasting reminder that true greatness often lives in the most unexpected places, waiting to be seen, heard, and appreciated.